Hi everyone, welcome to another video. Now in this video I have the great pleasure of welcoming Paul Laird onto the channel as we discuss everything across a wide spectrum of music related things. We talk bands, we talk genres, we talk favourite radio stations, we talk how things were in the 90s from the start to the end. You name it, me and Paul have talked about it, and in between all of that we also managed to squeeze in talking about his book, The Birth and Impact of Britpop. Managed to squeeze in a couple, just talking about a couple of the bands that Paul has in his book. If you haven't picked it up already, definitely go check it out. You can find it on Amazon and all the usual book places like that. But it's definitely worth adding to your book collection. And like I said, me and Paul talk in depth about several of the bands in his book. It's definitely worth picking up. You might even be able to pick it up before Christmas, as it is only a couple of weeks till Christmas now. So please sit back and I hope you enjoy this video. Me and Paul definitely did.
It's been pushed. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm all right. Yeah, you good, Paul?
Yeah. Everything's okay. Where are you, David? Where about in the country are you?
I'm in Scunthorpe in North Lincolnshire.
Right. So I'm assuming, because I've never been to Scunthorpe, I'm assuming that Scunthorpe is like Scotland. A bit grey, a bit wet.
Yeah, it's constantly grey and wet all the
Yeah,
time. Yeah.
yeah. So, you know, not we Northerners have got to stick together.
Yeah, it's not a great place. It does have its sunny moments. Well, I'm about 20 minutes from Hull is the nearest biggest city to me, so yeah.
Right, okay. I think I'd been to Hull like maybe once in the 90s for something. But of course, we'll probably talk about Hull, right? Because we'll definitely mention Soda at some point.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, there is a few bands from Hull, and Soda being one of them, definitely. And yeah, but I often ask when I do talk to people, especially bands in particular, did you ever come to Scunthorpe? Because, and they all say no, but they've had to drive past it. They've got to have gone past it or around it to get to Hull. They can't just get to Hull. So yeah.
So, like when you were like, how old were you in that period, David? How old were you? Like, so in 92 to 97, what age were you at that point?
Well, I was only 10 in 1993, so
Right. So you're too young to have kind of got involved, like in terms of going to
yeah,
gigs and
way
stuff.
too. I'm about 5 years too young to have been properly involved. Yeah.
Right. But from your knowledge, if a band had stopped in Scunthorpe, was there a venue? Like, was there a music scene in Scunthorpe?
From what I'm aware, there was two main venues in Scunthorpe. There was the place called the Baths Hall, which was still up and running in the early 2000s that I went to, and they did alternative nights that I did attend when I was at the local college and stuff. Still running, big used to be like a dance hall,
Yeah, yeah.
ballroom place, but that was still up and running. And they did have local bands playing. It used to be called, what was it called? I can't remember. Do you know, like if they'd have a competition where every week they'd have five new local bands and the
Yeah,
winners would
yeah.
all go
Like
to
an
the final?
open night thing. Yeah.
Yeah, they'd do that still in the early 2000s. But there was also a pub called the Lincoln Imp in Scunthorpe, and that had local bands on. I remember going to that when I was at college, and they had bands from Sheffield and all over the country were still coming to that when I was in my teens, nearly 10 years later at college and stuff. So, yeah, but they're both closed now on the door.
Right. So I know you're meant to be interviewing me, right? But
No, it's
I've
fine.
got
I don't mind. It's great.
I'm really fascinated. I'll tell you what I'm fascinated about, David, right? Is I like it when people create, right? I'm a big believer in that, that it's always better to create than not to create. And actually, like when I started my blog website back in about sort of 2015, 16, and started writing, it wasn't because I thought anybody would read it. It was because I wanted to be writing, right? And so I really love the fact that you create, right? You've got this Instagram account, but the main thing is the YouTube thing, right? Nobody else is doing that. And it's really interesting to me to think about you as this 10-year-old kid, 11, 12, 13, right? This big thing that kind of obsesses people and makes people angry, but also makes people really joyful. how did you kind of find your way to it, David? When did it become a big deal for you?
Well, I suppose, like in the early 2000s, I got caught up in I wasn't even interested in Oasis at that time or anything. Do you remember the PlayStation games? Tony Hawk's skateboarding was a big thing around
Yeah.
that time. So I got into a lot of music like on them computer games, American punk bands and ska bands. And they sort of linked in with what my dad had been listening to when he was younger. He still got all the like Madness and the specials, original 7 inches and things like that, and Paul Weller. So it also melded into that, and I was listening to that. But it wasn't until I started moved out of my own home with my living with my girlfriend, and I started listening to more modern indie stuff. So I was listening to a lot of Jake Bugg and things like that. But then I remember I was just at home on the radio, and Cast came on with the song Walk Away. And it sparked this memory in my mind of being in the car with my mum and dad. And do you remember it was Viking FM back in the 90s? And you know, you could have like 3 songs in a row and they'd have a
Yeah.
special. There was that. I think it's called Be With You by Mr. Big and China in Your Hand. That was the 3 songs thing. Cast Walk Away was one of them songs. And I
Yeah.
remember that moment being in the car and I was like, oh, I really liked that. And then I went to the local car boot sale the next weekend and Cast All Change was there. I turned it over. I looked it up on my phone what it was. I bought it. So then it's just spiraled out of from there. And now it's what you see. It's what you see behind me now. It's
I
ever
like that.
growing.
I like that you had to stop yourself there because you were going to say it spiraled out of control and you thought,
I
I'm not.
was, yeah.
That sounds like the kind of thing that your wife or girlfriend has maybe said. David, do you think this is getting out of control? You
Yeah.
know, do you think? Yeah, well, that's so great. I love that story. I love it for lots of reasons. Like, if people who read any of my stuff will know, or who used to follow me when I had a slightly bigger presence on X, before I deleted all my old social media in a fit of pique. But I was a skinhead for a long time, like a really long time. I was really heavily involved in the kind of skinhead scene. So when you're talking about your dad being into Madness and the Jam and Weller and all that kind of stuff, all of that stuff was floating around. And the ska thing was massive for me, like all that original kind of Trojan, Lovers Rock, Rock Steady, all of it. I just, that was really my first kind of thing. So that's really interesting. And it's amazing that you can remember those 3 songs in a row. That's the power of music, right? It's the power of it. It can just
Yeah.
arrive. I
Yeah,
love that.
that's it. And it's not the same now. It's not the same.
No, that is true. And I'm wary of talking about the good old days. But there is definitely something different in the current music scene. And I think it's about the internet, right? And it's about how easy it is to access things. But ironically, that is also making it very difficult for people to connect with things and to build real momentum. There was a
Yeah.
band over the last couple of years that I really loved called Colour TV. I don't know if you spotted them at any point.
I've heard of them. Yes, I have. Colour TV.
You would really like them, David. I just know from some of the other stuff that you would like them. They've got a real kind of Smiths thing going on. Suede are there, Shed Seven are there. You can hear it in the riffs and stuff. Really good bunch of kids as well. Really interesting. But you just knew in your heart of hearts, there's no top of the pops for them, right?
No.
It's not going to happen. There's not going to be that big tour. It's all so different. It's so instant. Um, and that's really sad. It's not that young people don't have a scene nowadays. They do, right? You've only got to look at how big the Taylor Swift tour was. But I think what's gone really is that kind of tribal thing.
Yeah.
We've lost that tribal thing, and I don't think that's been a good thing. I think when you're young, you should be in a tribe.
That's definitely gone. And I can remember being at college and everyone would have the music groups. You'd have the goths in one corner, the indie kids in another. There was me there with my ska punk. I was dressed the ska of the early 2000s and American stuff from the 90s was what I listened to at college. So there was me and my ska mates in one corner, bit of skateboarding. Then there'd be all the kids who were big into dance in another, but it's just not there no more. It's not
It's
there.
not. So who were those bands, David? Who were the big kind of American ska bands at that point? Because ska means something different in America than it does here a lot of times. So like No Doubt is the band that I think of who kind of came out of that
Yeah,
ska.
they were big. You will know no doubt from their album Tragic Kingdom and things
Yeah.
like that. A lot of people in the ska. I follow another group on account on Instagram called Ska Punk Daily, and often when they post about Gwen Stefani or No Doubt, they say that's their sort of big last ska album. After that, it was sort of, but bands like Less Than Jake, Real Big Fish, definitely Mighty Mighty Boss Tones. You must
Yeah,
have.
yeah, I know them. Yeah.
They were big in America that time, and they are very big now. They're getting ska punk in America is starting to build up again. I see it on that Instagram account. There's lots of big ska bands coming up and big in America again. It's really thriving at the minute and getting bigger. So, yeah,
That's great. I love that. I love the fact that you've got these kind of very different worlds in your background. You know, you've got the ska thing, and then
yeah,
the Britpop thing is much kind of like, I mean, I guess the lazy thing is it's a bit mod, right? And there's a lot of kind of mod influences in it and stuff, and glam rock as well. Maybe a little bit of punk. But yeah, I think it's good to have, you know, lots of different things lurking in your record collection. You know, I'm not keen on being kind of blocked off to stuff. I think that's really dangerous.
no, yeah. I've I felt like that was happening about a year ago. I was feeling myself getting boxed in, and I was like, I've got to, and I started broadening it. I've got to get more out because the more I've started doing this for the past must have been 4 years now, at least 4 years. And yeah, my account is titled Britpop or whatever, but there's more than that. And I'm very aware that there's more than that. I feel like the period from 89 to 94 is so much more diverse than that period after
Mm,
for the
definitely.
next 4 years. That bit there is opened my eyes. There's so many bands in there to discover, and that it's. I know there's someone. I found a band being posted on Facebook, and they posted some pictures from a club in Bristol, and they were in a band called something along the lines of "Say No to Milk" or "Get More Milk," and I just messaged, "Oh, I'd love to hear some of your music." And the next thing I know, "Oh, I'm going to send you some tapes. What's your address?" And they're in the mail now. They're coming. I
That's
ain't even got
great.
a tape player to listen to them.
You got to get one. You're gonna have to
I
go out and
know.
buy yourself a little Walkman. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I think that is right. I think, you know, that period 89 to 92, 93 is interesting. But yeah, it's not good for you to, you know, like you wouldn't eat the same meal all the time,
No.
right? That would become very boring. So I think it's really important to listen to other things as well. And you know, it's tricky because certain things mean something to you, and so why should you stop listening to them? You know, I'm not, you know,
Yeah.
advocating that, but I think it's good to kind of just spread it out a little bit. You know, be open to the wonder of music. You know, it's such an important thing for so many people, certainly for me, and clearly for you as well. And you must have noticed as well, David. You know, I mean, I've seen it when you've been interviewing people in bands. You know, when you ask people about their influences, they're quite wide. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
there are lots of people. You know, because Nick and I have interviewed a lot of people on the Mild Mannered Army, the podcast that we run. You know, and these people are not talking about, you know, just the kinks and madness. You know,
No.
they're talking about hip hop, and they're talking about dance, and okay, maybe it doesn't come through in the music, but it was important to them. You know, so I think there's this weird idea that Britpop was just, you know, I mean, this is the kind of official Guardian take, isn't it? It was like just a lot of little Englanders running around waving Union Jacks and not listening to anything other than the Kinks and Madness and whatever. The truth of the matter is, lots of those people in those bands were going out to, you know, ministry or raving and, you know, taking Molly, and, you know, like it was just a totally different scene than it's portrayed. When we had, or I had a chat with Johnny Dean from Menswear long time ago. We got him to come on this music show that we used to do on Mix LR, something like that. And he picked an entirely black set list, entirely black music, all of it, and the bulk of it hip hop. But I can't think of a more Britpop band than Menswear, right? For most people, he didn't pick a single thing by the people that you think he would pick. It was
No.
all hip hop and R&B and soul and funk. It's like, that's great. It's so great to know that that's really what was going on in the background.
It is. And I remember that, and I remember doing it, and I thought to myself, wow, to say he was that, and I thought the same. He was influenced by the same as everyone else, the Kinks and stuff. And I've actually got a magazine, it's upstairs in my drawer with the other menswear things I've got that I did for I think it's a magazine called Suits, and it's from like in the 2000s. And he's a bit younger then, but it's all over. And he was saying his influences in that magazine were like David Bowie and things like that and stuff. So it's not just, and that's like the same as Brett from Suede and the way he was dressing. He's like, I was taking influences from that with my suits and just wearing them. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, these people, I think, creative people tend to pull from all sorts of different places. They tend not to live in just little boxes, you know. And you can hear that in what you're doing as well. You've got this background in the ska punk thing, and you're a gamer and you're skateboarding, right? That's not the traditional narrative of a Britpop fan.
no. And it's funny you should say that. I have a friend from college, and he was the same as me. We listened to the same sort of music. He was more listening to, I think it's like emo and things at the time, but he was listening to the same sort of local punk bands and stuff. But now he owns his own soul record company. And he listens to soul. He collects soul music. He has not doesn't do anything that from what we did in the past, and
Yeah.
he DJs in America and Europe soul music. He goes around like
Wow.
Los Angeles and stuff where the clubs are, and it's big. And he goes all year round and does all this DJing and stuff. And I'm like, that's amazing.
It's great.
Where we grew up together, and you're there now living that life. I think it's a million miles away from where we was 25 years ago.
But that's the way it should be, right?
Yeah.
It's fine for people like me and you, so I write a book about Britpop, you run this, YouTube channel about Britpop. That's great, but that can't be all there is, right? There must
No.
be other stuff, there
Yeah.
must be other stuff. And I think it's great when people, take a left turn and do something completely different, and that was part of the reason why I shut down my website and why I deleted my ex account, because I felt like, I was getting a little bit boxed in by it, and it probably wasn't allowing me to show the best version of myself.
No. I liked the website because it was very insightful. When I first joined X, you were one of the first ones I went to, and I found your website. I found it very insightful with lots of interesting things that I didn't know before. It opened up
Yeah.
doors for me to bands that I didn't know before. So that was good from when I first. That's the only reason I joined X, to discover more things. So it was
Oh,
Twitter
that's
then,
good.
but yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was very proud of the mild mannered army. By the time I deleted it, it was, getting big numbers in terms of readership. Certainly big numbers for a little independent blog, and it had definitely helped play a part in, resurrecting interest in a lot of people. Nobody had written about Lick or Thurman or Strange Love, for a long, long time, probably since the 90s, and that was what I was most proud of, was writing articles about those bands and then being able to take those articles and take those bands and put them into a book and give those bands, the spotlight that they deserved. What I actually did was I went to John Harris's book, The Last Party. Do you know that? It's like the big
yeah,
Britpop book, apparently. Actually, it's not the big Britpop book. It's really about, UK politics and what have you. And I went to the index of that book, and none of the bands that I loved were there. None of them. It was only the big boys, and even some of the smaller ones. I think maybe Shed 7 got like a line, like one line on one page in this book. And I remember looking at that and thinking, you know what? There's a bigger story to be told here. There's a much bigger story, and there's a much more interesting scene to be talked about than just, the big ones. And that was the whole reason why the blog existed, and it's the whole reason why the book existed, was to take the bands that drove through Scunthorpe on their way to play the Adelphi and put them in the spotlight. And if you think about, we mentioned it at the start, right? If you think about Soda, right? Nobody was talking about Soda.
No.
Nobody was talking about Soda. Nobody remembered, nobody was Googling it. Nobody was watching them on the Big Breakfast with Zig and Zag, it wasn't happening until, me and some other people as well, of course, started really promoting and pushing that again. And I feel really happy about that, when I think about Soda in particular, and how how tragic that story is, you know.
I don't get it. Soda are one of them bands. Big Breakfast was bringing in millions of viewers in
Yeah.
the morning time. But Soda weren't the only bands, but let's talk about Soda. They went on the Big Breakfast at least once.
Mhm.
I don't understand how you can get that to that point and then it all just stop. What it's
Well,
like people are watching.
I think there were. The problem was that by that point in time, right, the scene is already, all the oxygen's been sucked out by the big bands, right? And I don't just mean Oasis, who, as you know, I've got a bit of a problem with, right? But genuinely Blur as well, and Pulp and
Yeah,
Suede, they are sucking all the attention. And Soda actually don't sound like Blur, and they don't sound like Pulp, and they don't sound like Suede, maybe closer to Suede than anybody else, and they don't sound like Oasis. They're their own little thing. And so I think it was difficult for them because, then there was record company stuff going on in the background, and then, people had very serious accidents and injuries on stage and all that. Carl from the band talks about this in the book. And I think they were just one of those bands where it just never quite happened. They got
yeah,
close on a number of occasions, but then, that album comes out. I mean, it must be like 5 years ago now, right? Artificial
about
Flavor.
5 years ago. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Like 2018, 2019, something like that. And, it's just like one great pop song after another.
yeah.
Every single track, you're just like, oh, this is great. How were they not the biggest band in the country? But they weren't.
No, I think also people's ignorance has a part to play because they get blinded, like we maybe already said. They see Oasis, and that's all they want to listen to. They're not interested in any other guitar band at the time. They're just out there. They maybe saw Soda, but they're like, no, I'm not interested. They just listen to what they want to listen to, and they're not interested in anything else. Because when I was, I did a post on Instagram about Nylon Bombers about 2 or 3
Yeah.
Sundays ago, and they also appeared on the Big Breakfast. And I was looking, they were on the Big Breakfast, and Bennett were on the Big Breakfast. Bands were there, but people just didn't want to know. The records were there to buy.
Yeah. I think part of the problem as well is that there were so many bands,
Yeah,
right? I mean, you see that whenever any of the accounts who share, old newspaper articles and Select and NME and all that, whenever they do that, the number of bands that you've forgotten about or that you've never heard of, and you go, oh my God, and you, what? But there were just so many. It was just impossible almost to kind of see them all. And I saw my fair share, and I was at my fair share of gigs and I bought my fair share of records. But there are still things that I had to go back and dig into. I mean, Soda were one that I didn't have to dig into. I already knew about Soda. I had Slave to the Fashion page on a sort of limited edition 7-inch single and all this kind of stuff. And I just loved them. I just thought Soda were just great. I was really happy that the album did well, that they got a bit of attention off the back of it, because, they deserved it. They really
yeah.
deserved it.
And the album sold out. You can't buy it from them anymore. I bought the last poster. It's in a tube waiting when I do get my music room up and built. It's ready to be there. And that I think that album is up to about £30 on Discogs if you wanted to buy it. It's not cheap to get hold of secondhand now. It's going up.
Well, that's good. I'm happy about that. I mean, the band don't make any money out of that, but it suggests that there is interest in it and that people
Yeah,
kind of are appreciating it now. So, a band like Soda, they deserved a bit of credit, a bit of recognition. They were a band that meant something to me. I saw them more than once in different places across the country. I think I saw them in Leeds. I think I maybe saw them in Manchester once, and certainly in Scotland. I would have seen them when they came up here. They were just they looked great as well. They had a really cool look. It's very 90s. You wouldn't go down Scunthorpe High Street dressed like that now. In fact, I'm not so sure that you would have walked down Scunthorpe High Street dressed like they dressed in the 90s. It was pretty out there, a lot of what they were wearing,
Yeah.
And I quite liked that. They weren't particularly laddie. And it's, if you think about Scotland, the north of England, we are quite a hardy bunch of people because of the weather and because of, what's
Yeah.
happened to traditional industries and unemployment and all that. We are tough. But to see a band like Soda, in their skinny fit t-shirts and all that, it's like, that's amazing. That is so great.
Just out there, you have to be tough out there in them t-shirts. And yeah, it's got, and Hull is right on the River Humber. It's there. It's getting everything from that coastal weather. Yeah.
Yeah. So I love that. Love them. I'll tell you another band I wanted to talk with you about, David. I think I sent you a little sort of top 10 list, and we won't get through all of them, but there's another one that I always try and kind of big up. Well, there's two that I try and big up whenever I get the chance to speak to people. And one of them is Lick. And I wondered how much you were aware of Lick and what your thoughts on them were.
I wasn't aware of Lick until I heard it on the Britpop Revival show. They played stand up, and then I think you maybe replied to something in because he posts
Yeah.
when he puts the songs on. You replied, and I was like, "Oh, I need to go listen to that." And I was like, "Wow!" And then it was started researching, and I was like, "One single or two singles?" And again, I was like, "How does this happen?" The one single, but they hadn't released their album. It was online. I've had to ask other people for it because it wasn't on the website no more. And it's like, well, who's got it? Who's got it? Yeah, I have it now. Yeah, I've got it now, but I can't go buy it.
No, well, that was the point I was going to make. For anybody who's watching who doesn't know, like the singles are up on Spotify, of course, and other music streaming services, I'm sure. But yeah, that album Turbulence, that is the lost artifact of the Britpop era. In fact, I was speaking to Gary and another one of the guys in the band about 2 weeks ago, and they are, working to try and find a way to make that happen, to get the album out. I was quite keen to try and push the idea that they get back together for a kind of reunion show, to launch that. It's not going to happen, but I think the album might see the light of day at some point. But that's another incredible story, right? You've got this guy Gary sitting in, a nowhere town in Australia. He's obsessed with Susie Quattro. He's gay. It's the 90s, we don't get legalization of the age of consent until quite late on in the decade. He packs up his bag, he comes to London, he starts a band, and there is a lot of buzz about Lick. Like they were a big deal on the scene. And then I mentioned this in the book. I've actually got a copy of the facts that Seymour Stein, who was the head of Sire Records, signed George Michael, signed Madonna, and he sent this fax to the Sire Records A&R guys in London saying, look, I'm flying in. We don't let this band go. This is the band. This is the band. I don't care what else happened. And he's like, we've got to get this band. And he arrives and they get signed. And then it all just kind of falls away, and then the album's trapped in, music purgatory for what, 30 years now. It's crazy.
Yeah, and it is crazy, and it's like it makes me wonder. But at least they had the album to put online. So many bands don't have the rights to the album, and they can't get it back from wherever it's been recorded. It's they had it, and they can do what. It's nice that they can do what. Well, I suppose they can't do what they want with it, but
No, there's a bit of negotiation to be
yeah,
done, but yeah.
yeah,
It's like the Flamingos, who are another band that I constantly big up. The Flamingos, that debut album, Plastic Jewels, great album, but it's not available to listen to on Spotify or add to a playlist. Some record company somewhere has got it. I can't imagine them making any money out of it. Why not return it to the artist or, let them make a couple of I mean, much as I love the Flamingos, they're not going to get the same number of streams that Wonderwall gets.
No.
right? So it just seems crazy that there are all these bands with all this music. Manta Ray is another one, you know. There's more than one Manta Ray album. In fact, I think there's maybe three. I think there's two that were released, and there's a third one that maybe didn't get released as well. All these bands that people don't really talk about, you know, when the Guardian get, it's the second time I've taken a dig at the Guardian, but when the Guardian get their knickers in a twist about, you know, how Brexit was caused by, I don't know, girls and boys or whatever mad theory they've got, it's like they don't get it. You know, that there were loads of really wonderful people making really wonderful records, and the only thing they were doing was making music. You know, maybe it's a criticism. It wasn't a particularly political scene, you know, in lots of ways. But, you know, we were just young and having a good time, and we wanted to listen to records. Right,
Yeah.
we've got the 10-minute warning light, David.
Oh, did you get it as well? Did you? I'm
I
just
get it
like,
as
yeah,
well.
I've got it. Yeah, 10-minute warning. Like, so you've mentioned Soda and Lick. Now, Manta Ray, I have spoken to one of the Sned. I've spoken to, is it David Snedden out of Manta Ray? I'm trying to get him on the channel.
Dave Standen, yeah, Dave's
Standing,
great.
that's it. He's not quite up for it yet, but I'm going to twist his arm. I know he's done it for you, and so I know he can do it if he wanted to do it. Yeah, and
Yeah,
I didn't
he's,
know there was a second Flamingos album till the other day until you posted. I only knew of the one. I didn't know there
yeah,
was one like 10 years later.
that's right. Street Noise Invades the House. Yeah, it's a great little album. I don't even know if that you can get a copy on Discogs, to be honest with you. I don't think so. I think there's like one piece of evidence that it exists online. One of the songs is up on YouTube. There's a video. But I mean, those two guys, David, James and Jude Cook, I mean, they are just, I mean, they're just heroes of mine. You know, they're both now authors. James writes, well, he's had published non-fiction books, one about music in the 90s and the music that kind of shaped him, and then a book about his relationship with his non-verbal autistic daughter, which is just the most beautiful book. It's called In Her Room. I can't recommend it highly enough. And then Jude, you know, they both write reviews for like big papers and all the rest of it, but Jude's also got two novels. And, you know, they're great writers. They were great musicians. They looked great. Like they were really cool, you know, the twin thing, you know, and they were quite handsome and, you know, yeah, just great. Just a great band. Really great band. And another band who probably deserved to be a bit bigger than they actually were, you know. But I love the fact that for a couple of years they were really active on X, right? Like there was constant newspaper cuttings getting
Yeah.
posted, you know, and pictures and gig reviews and all that kind of stuff. I think that's James. I think James has got this kind of archive of material, you know, which is just it's just a treat to look at that stuff, you know, get a little glimpse behind the scenes. But yeah, Flamingos, love the Flamingos.
Let's talk about Thurman then, Paul, because they interest me when people talk about the early 90s, bands like the Boo Radleys and Lush and the Verve coming out of the shoegaze scene and changing their sound. But then you've got Thurman, who was this heavy metal band.
Yeah,
That is a bigger change than it is coming out of shoegaze, because shoegaze is still indie
it's
in the
indie.
90s, but heavy metal is a total 180 flip to go and make pop music.
Well,
It's
so the guys were out in America. Nick and his brother, the two Kennys, were in the States, and it wasn't just that they were a heavy metal band; they were successful. Like they had a big hit single, they were all over MTV. But Nick just kind of read the mood in the room. You know, he could see the shift was coming, but also they just wanted to make music. And so when I think they lost their deal with the record label after that hit single. I can't remember what it was called now. And so they came away, licked their wounds, and started writing songs that I don't think it was cynical. You know, I think that's the criticism people make of Thurman. They think that, well, they just, you know, jumped on the bandwagon. I don't think so. And if you look at what Nick does now, he kind of has a almost a 50 style rockabilly thing that he does. And he had another band straight after Thurman. The name is going out of my head. It's always been different sounds, which ties in with what we were talking about earlier, right? That you shouldn't be boxed in.
no,
But
yeah.
Thurman were just great fun as well. right? They did the mod thing really well. I mean, come on, having a Britpop single called English Tea. I
I know.
mean, that's great. That is so great, you
And
know?
that ties in with the whole thing of Englishness at that time period. To
Absolutely.
have that song, and it reminds me of when I chatted to Lee Daly from Jubilee a couple of months ago, when I asked him, "Oh, why was the band named Jubilee?" And he goes, "Oh, because we were celebrating like the Queen's Jubilee. We was naming it after it to tie it all." And I was like, "It's great that they was just all getting encompassed in that Englishness at the time, and that English tea song, and then the Jubilee are doing that, and it's like, yeah,
Yeah, it was a really look, I mean, this is not a political channel, so I'm not going to make a political statement, but I get why some people are cross about Britpop. I get why some people have got some issues around, maybe Britishness or Englishness, but that wasn't my experience of the 90s. My experience of the 90s was that it was pretty joyful. It was people trying to celebrate something and not, deny that other things were going on. And things like Thurman were just so like really great pop music is disposable, you know? And Thurman were disposable in lots of ways, It was 3-minute pop songs. You take it or you could leave it. I took it. I loved it. And I will maintain until my dying breath that that album, Lux, is worthy of a place in the top five Britpop albums, never mind a top 100 or a top 50, in the top five. Because what they do, to my mind, is they run you through a jukebox of British pop culture. There are tracks that sound like Blur. There's a track that sounds like Mott the Hoople. There's tracks that sound like David Bowie, right? They're just running you through kind of British pop culture. And I think if you look at Britpop as a whole, that's kind of what it was. It was a celebration of all sorts of elements of British popular culture.
thank you to everyone who stuck around to the end and watched the whole interview. Like I said at the beginning, I really enjoyed that and it was very special. I've been waiting to talk to Paul for a long time. I've known him a couple of years now on the socials, and that was the first opportunity I've actually had to talk to him properly. I really enjoyed it. And like I said, go pick up his book if you haven't. You can definitely find it. Probably get it still for Christmas. Here we are. And as always, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and also give the video a thumbs up. It goes a long way in helping spread the word and get more eyes on the channel. So, thanks again for watching, and I will see you next time.